if you have an organization that's really good at being long-term oriented, you can ship a bunch of things in the short term that like you think will work in the long term, but you're actually not super stressed about like creating the most easy, beautiful product. And I think in AI today, a lot of people sometimes they get caught on both ends where they try to build both the terminal, beautiful, maximum viable product. And on the other end, they build these like hyper narrow features, but they don't ship enough features fast enough that they can outcompete the noise of the space or the like 30,000 other AI people shipping adjacent features.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Turner Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Michael Dempsey, managing partner of Compound. We spent 2 hours talking through the past, present, and future of a bunch of topics in technology and investing.
The main thing people get wrong in deep tech areas is the commoditization curve. They think that the edge will lie in technology, and it almost never does.
Michael started investing in AI in 2016, being the first investor in now unicorns Runway and Wayve, but hasn't done much over the past few years.
People are trying to king-make companies. They're trying to like foie gras these startups into like just blowing as much on inference as possible to like nuke a market. And it just like doesn't work. You have these like late movers of like really pedigreed people that then go and raise money, and like they're not in it to like actually compete. They're in it to like feel like they're not leaving a bunch of money on the table.
We talk about the future of AI and robotics.
In robotics, a lot of people have like the hammer of like AI scaling laws and like humanoid robot, and they're like looking for a bunch of nails.
How Compound thinks of itself as a research-driven investment firm.
We do the thing that like most VCs tell you not to do. We very discreetly predict the future of
What public and private market investors can learn from each other.
idea moats, and narrative capture is actually like way more valuable than they ever appreciated.
Advice for anyone starting in and building a brand in VC today, and why venture firms don't compound, they actually decay over time.
Most firms hire junior people to expand the bandwidth of the partners. And what they should be doing is expanding the bandwidth of the firms. Investing is about figuring out what is it that you're really great at and like pushing that advantage over and over again. I was on a pitch call with like a fairly young founder a couple weeks ago, and he was like, I was reading your stuff and like you're kind of like a boomer VC. I was like,
no.
Cool. Yeah, like I guess so.
A quick thank you to Kevin Kwok, Andy Wiseman, Chris at Runway, Blake Robbins, and S. Mac at Compound for helping brainstorm topics for Michael. A reminder, I publish new episodes of The Peel every week, exploring the world's greatest startup stories, just like this one. Tune in next week for a conversation with Dan Fader, who runs private market investing at the University of Michigan's endowment. But before we talk to Michael, I have to tell you about Ramp. If you're running a finance team, you know how much time gets wasted on expense management. Chasing receipts, categorizing transactions, waiting for expense reports, it adds up quickly. Ramp handles all of this automatically. Ramp is a corporate card expense management platform that over 40,000 companies like Shopify, CBRE, and Stripe are using to streamline their financial operations. But here's what makes their corporate card different. Every transaction gets automatically categorized and matched to receipts. No more wondering what that $47 charge was 3 weeks later. You can set spending controls, get real-time alerts, and even block certain merchant categories. That sounds pretty cool. It's like having a finance team member embedded in every purchase. The platform integrates with your accounting system and ERP, so everything flows through without manual data entry. Whether you're issuing cards to a few employees or managing spend across departments, Ramp gives you visibility and control without the paperwork. Stop chasing receipts. Check out ramp.com/thepeel. Get $250 and see what a corporate card can actually do for you. Time is money. Save both with Ramp. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think this will be fun. It's been like a couple of years since we actually hung out and talked.
Yeah.
So we're just going in. We have a good list of stuff to talk about.
We're grown up. We're old.
Yeah, that's true. So the main question when I told people we're talking, I think 3 or 4 people said, you got to ask them about this. So you were the first investor in a company called Runway.
Yep.
I think I'm just looking up on Crunchbase. It was a $2 million round.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to assume 10 million post or less valuation. They just recently, a couple months ago, raised, I think $300 million at a $3 billion post money, something like that valuation. That's pretty impressive. So a lot of people were like, okay, Runway was not like a super hot sex, like AI wasn't invented yet back when you invested. Like
the VCs, it wasn't.
Yeah. So I guess I really just want to hear like, what's the story there?
Yeah. So we had been doing a bunch of research in, at the time, what was generative models. And that was like these things called generative adversarial networks out of University of Tokyo, and originally started by this guy, Ian Goodfellow, who's a prominent AI researcher. And I think our view was like, okay, something's going to happen in creativity. Everyone thought AI was going to tackle very narrow image recognition use cases at that time. This is like 2016.
This is like self-driving probably.
Yeah. And then the other was like, oh, like these enterprise use cases, which we see now in like legal and stuff. But this was 16, 17. We had incubated a company that I was a co-founder of called Shadows, which was like built around this premise, but it was a fully vertically integrated AI native animation studio. So imagine Pixar, but using AI tools. Turns out we were like 8 years too early.
Which that's bad. You don't want to be 8 years too early.
No, well, we can talk about why I do, but yeah. And in that time, we learned a lot. We ended up actually selling the company. But one of the things that we saw was like there was a ton of creatives who liked using these newer AI tools, but they like didn't really know how. And there was these 3 guys at NYU, where I went to school, who were working on this tool. And I just saw them posting videos on Twitter. And it was basically like, how do you get open source AI models into a nice UI such that you can use them as a non-technical person? And
which that seems like a pretty big deal back in 2018.
This is 2017.
2017, yeah.
So yeah, it definitely was a big deal. But everyone was kind of like, this is a narrow use case, and like these models kind of look like shit, and like it's a, like this doesn't really look like a human that it's generating. And
I remember you used to, when you'd post, you'd always like post these like research recaps of like, it looks like they're getting better. And I look at the pictures like, that still doesn't look like a person.
Yeah. So anyways, so I DM'd them. I DM'd Cristobal, who's the CEO of Runway today. And it was very clear, like, okay, this is going to happen. Someone's going to figure this out. And I think the thing that we believed is that the tailwinds in AI were big enough that if you had a great product team, you could build products that would work around the quality of the models to enable creatives to do more and more things over time. So kind of betting on like trend of model with team that can like build around that trend. We led their seed round. We called some friends, and the main learning was like, cool, there's a small group of people who wanted to use these tools. Companies started to scale, and then basically looked up, and to the founders' credit, they had, around $1 million of ARR, and they said, this is just like not big enough, and this isn't going to be a thing that everyone wants. Like this tool to help non-technical people use this is not a venture business. And they narrowed in on this video editing workflow with a few very specific AI tools that they had built. Green screen being one of them. How do you quickly green screen and in Paint? And basically tossed out the $1 million in ARR, started over, and we raised an all insider Series A. And, at that time, I think it was $6 million or $7 million. And what they quickly then learned was, as they were starting to build more of their own models, like they could start to more tightly couple product with the model development to like get these kind of superhuman creative experiences. And, to fast forward from 2019 till now they have kind of the premier video generation model in the world. They do a bunch of image generation models and a bunch of other things. And, the idea is, how do you enhance creativity and allow more people to tell stories in a variety of ways? And yeah, Runway is, an example of just like being obsessed with a problem and waiting for a group of people that very much understand the problem natively and are very close to the customer, which is creatives, not kind of removed as like AI people. And they're one of the fastest growing businesses I've ever personally seen.
Amazing. And so what is the current product today?
Current product today is effectively, there's a few different. There's a video generation model that allows you to go either image or text to video and
just type something in and
creates it. There's an image model called References, which allows you to both create images like other people use Midjourney as an example, but also do things like using natural language to edit images quite well. And so they've basically built these world models that very deeply understand how worlds work and can be prompted with many different inputs and outputs. And they're going to push a bunch of things on that in the future. And most recently, they started to preview something called, I think it's called Game Maker, which is the ability to use a similar creative-oriented model to create your own games. And I think the main thing is Runway wants to own creativity in the future. And so if you were to think about all the ways in which people interact with the Adobe Creative Suite, say, our view is that the primitives for the next generation of Adobe will look quite different. It's not going to be this tab on the side where you have 50 different tools. It will be something else. And in my view, which is the most biased of maybe anyone in the world, Runway is the best team in the world to kind of build product around that.
And there's kind of like been an explosion of some of these like AI creative tools over the past couple years.
Yeah.
I know you sort of have a pretty strong opinion on building products for the today and like what's going to get you really quick, explosive ARR growth versus building a foundation over the long period of time. Is Runway maybe an example of that?
Yeah, I think Runway is like a perfect example of like understanding what is the long game you're playing. So something that Chris talks about a lot is, and he's said this to me before and it's stuck in my head and it really influenced a lot of how I think, is to have like a short-term oriented view of what your product should be only limits like the scope of ambition of that product. And so he's much more willing to know the North Star is like enable creators, and the in-between steps maybe are less prescriptive and more of like letting emergence happen. And I think that has helped the company a lot because model performance has kind of had these step functions in which they're like, oh, wow, it's kind of crazy we can do that today. And then also has like kind of a linear, or maybe, I don't know, exponential, but smoother like trend line up. And so it allows them to think about product as this malleable thing where about 2.5 or 3 years ago, one of the things that they started to press on was there's a very tight coupling between shipping product and shipping models often. And
can you explain that? Like what is that?
So like to ship a product, you have a model that powers it, right? And then you have a bunch of other like UI, UX interactions you have to like go figure out. And like training a model is like something that, is alchemy. You can do it. Figuring out all those UI, UX interactions and connecting them all together in the back end is actually like takes up a lot of time. And so if your goal is actually to run the maximum number of experiments possible to figure out the right answer, which is kind of how Runway operates, you actually shouldn't worry about trying to build in that short term this hyper connected product. And so what they did is they shipped 30 features in 30 days that were all actually like quite fragmented. And so at that moment in time, they were having such performance on the model side that they just had a page and it was like, here's 30 things you want to do. You actually aren't going to be able to like connect them all. And it's not going to be like this beautiful product where you can flow through them or, like in Photoshop where you have all those tools. It's like these very purpose-built things. And it allowed them to start to see what are all the use cases that were working with different users, what like was being heavily used versus not heavily used, what could they get better training data on to then train the model. And so it was kind of this idea that like, if you have an organization that's really good at being long-term oriented, you can ship a bunch of things in the short term that like you think will work in the long term, but you're actually not super stressed about like creating the most easy, beautiful product. And I think in AI today, a lot of people sometimes like they get caught on both ends where they try to build both like the terminal, beautiful, maximum viable product. And on the other end, they build these like hyper narrow features, but they don't ship enough features fast enough that they can outcompete the noise of the space or the like 30,000 other AI people shipping adjacent features to their core user base or core kind of set of users. And Runway was fortunate enough to be able to ship very quickly, but also have like this North Star that was driving them at all times. So I don't know. Those are some of the learnings.
Yeah. What do you think you have to do in order to like do that successfully? Like if I'm hearing this for the first time and I may be doing it the opposite way where I'm like super narrow, super scoped out.
Yeah.
What would you recommend if I want to step back and try 30 features in 30 days? Like, is there a right or wrong way to do it?
I am just a person who sits and thinks. And so I don't know if I have a great answer. I think the probable right way is like understand that like, I think again, like I'm a big believer of like limits, like reason often creates limits in companies. And so a lot of people would say at the time Runway was, I think 35 people when they did this, maybe 40. They'd be like, we're a product org that like, has, I don't know, say at that time it was 8 researchers and on the Eng team, maybe 15 people. And so they'd say, okay, across these 23 people and then the 17 other non-Eng science side, how are we possibly going to move this quickly? And I don't know, like Chris and Anastasis and Alejandro just kind of don't like, they're not baked in that like Silicon Valley YC-ism culture. They just like don't think about it that way. And so I guess like my main view is often like the lessons of the prior 10 years of startups, like 2008 to 2016 was incredibly valuable for startup founders because a bunch of information became super legible to them through like blogs and writing and YC and all this stuff.
I learned a ton from all those resources.
Yeah. And it's like, it was great. It was like this mystical world was becoming demystified.
Yep.
And then those things started to become ingrained in culture. And that's how people thought about backing the right founders, how founders will behave. And we have new versions of that today. And I would argue like a lot of those lessons are probably more useless than not now on a go-forward basis, both because of the amount of capital, the speed at which teams move, the tools available because of AI, like all those things. And so I don't know. Increasingly, we say this thing a lot, which is like creativity is the main constraint in startups now on a go-forward basis. And our entire view is like the most creative founders will be the ones that win. And there's a bunch of stuff around what being a good creative founder is versus an artist that doesn't understand how to build a company. But I think like having that mindset probably is something that we orient more towards when we're talking to founders today.
So I guess I want to ask you more about that, but maybe it would be a good place to say, so what exactly is Compound, like the firm that you work at?
Yeah.
Did you join after it was started? I'm trying to remember this.
I joined as we raised our first fund.
Okay.
So Compound was originally started by my partner, David. I joined as we were closing our first fund, and I kind of took over running the firm in about 2019.
Okay.
We call ourselves a thesis-driven, research-centric investment firm. And what that means for us is we do a bunch of primary research in academia, in R&D groups, in, like government research. And we try to understand from a primary material sense, where's the world going, what is happening? And then we build bottoms-up theses across a subset of categories and that are very prescriptive. And so we do the thing that like most VCs tell you not to do, which is like we very discreetly predict the future of what we think matters, where we think value accrues, what are the areas that make sense.
Yep.
And we typically do it across areas that carry large amounts of science or engineering risk, or that carry like, we'll just call it like societal shifts that are more long tail distributed than people, or less long tail distributed than people appreciate.
So you mean like fatter tails?
Yeah. So people would think like a lot of the stuff that's happened in crypto over the past 6 years was like really unlikely. And like our view is actually like the societal shifts of people losing trust in institutions at the rate that they did, people wanting to control their own capital, data, whatever. All these types of things are actually far more likely to happen than the average person models. And so like our orientation is around that. And the view is we do that at the very early stage at kind of seed pre-seed, and we do that at the kind of liquid asset side as well on crypto tokens and public markets. And everything in the middle, we partner with founders through the Series B usually, and then come off boards shortly after that.
But you're saying you invest inception through Series B?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we enter only at seed.
Enter only at seed?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the public stuff.
Okay. Makes sense. Do you do public market investing from the fund, or this is just like a personal interest?
Within the Compound management company, but not in the funds are separate.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense. I feel like everything you just said, we're going to spend the next hour like going a little bit deeper on like each specific thing that you said. So I think one that's interesting, you talked about you take a bunch of research, you synthesize, you do a lot of your own, you start to think about what are interesting areas. So when you think about the world right now, what's interesting based on everything that you're seeing?
I think the vast majority of where we're spending time is bio, crypto, and then like how AI impacts physical areas. And so some of that is bio, some of it's like synthetic biology though, and some of it's like material science. And then there's like longer tail stuff that we know, we've built a bunch of views on, but we actually haven't deployed money against as much. Like energy is probably another example of that. And then I have a nouveau obsession with like, I think healthcare over the next decade is probably investable again, where I'd say for the past 4 years, it's been borderline not investable.
So when a category is investable or not investable, are there certain things you're looking for? Like when you say like AI right now, today, what's your current, your feelings about it?
AI from 2022 to 2025, where we sit today, sucked all of the air out of the room of tech, period. all the talent went and worked at AI companies. And the main movement in that time was look at a bunch of areas and figure out what is the low-hanging fruit to build new types of applications that are 50 to 500% more effective than the prior primitive of like vertical software, say. That's like not what we do. We think that those ideas are like very obvious, and we are probably not going to be able to fund those because what Compound is great at is backing N of one style companies. We are not built to pick the best company across 5 that all look the same at the seed stage. And I think now people are starting to, one, have some sort of narrowing of the field in all these areas such that it doesn't make sense to go start the 10th legal AI business. And it doesn't make sense to go work at the 10th legal AI business if you're talent and as an operator. And so that pushes people to move into what we call kind of like this next phase of technology development, which is like non-skeuomorphic / native businesses. And our bet is that over the next, call it 3 to 5 years, where is most interesting for us to be investing is in those things that look different in either how they approach go-to-market, how they approach product, or even like how they approach like UI than traditional software has, and then like the kind of fast followers of this first wave of AI has. And I think like there's examples of those businesses. So like you could make an argument that all of these AI software generation businesses are kind of that, like the Lovables, and Cursor's kind of a version of that. It's like a little light version. There are probably next order versions that are, we've looked at stuff in like AI therapy, which think that that's really interesting.
But not like generative AI chatbot therapy, right?
No, yeah.
So what's the thesis with therapy?
I think in general, the main view is like there is a clear need and a clear desire for people to interact asynchronously and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with something that has context on them as a human being and something that can help them understand themselves over long periods of time. And today, people go to therapy and they pay a lot of money and they do it, let's call it once a week or every 2 weeks or once a month, whatever. And they do it like a random time that they happen to be able to do it.
They might forget things, might be feeling more emotionally or less emotionally charged when the conversation's happening.
All sorts of things. And like even like, so we were one of the first investors in Talkspace a long time ago. And Talkspace is a digital therapy company. It's a public company today. The main insight from Talkspace, and this is like 2014, it was the founders were married and they were in couples therapy. And what the therapist realized is that after they would leave, they would both text the therapist a bunch of stuff because they didn't want to say it in front of each other. And so
that's the point of couples therapy.
Sure. But like you, like many things, you realize like it's sometimes easier to text someone because you don't have to see their face or you're not next to them.
And so you can like specifically say exactly what you want versus, like what I'm doing right now. I'm making things up versus like specifically scripted out.
Exactly. And like that is 11 years ago, a very similar primitive, which is like sometimes these guardrails we put up are actually like quite freeing for us. And I think like that is also probably true with talking to a human versus not. And then the question is like, okay, what's the product experience? What's the mechanism to make it not be talking to an AI chatbot as if it's a therapist? Because that's like a very skeuomorphic approach to this. And that might work for very specific things. There's a company in Europe that's doing this across, I believe is like male ED is like a problem, and they are scaling quite quickly around that. People have talked about doing this for very specific indications. Eating disorders for women was another one that people are talking about, like why would an AI therapist be better? But I think in general, the product experience probably looks a little different. And so we are kind of just in this phase of trying to talk to as many people who have interesting views. Like we're pretty creative, but that's like, a relative bar to VCs, not to actually people who build things. And so we're trying to talk to the builders on that side. Yeah. So and maybe to get back to your initial question, like I think AI is at its like maximally obvious point today. There's massive consensus across the entire industry. And anytime I see that, what that typically means is that's probably time for Compound to like observe and not deploy too much money. And so you can make an argument Compound has built a firm in some ways being early to AI in 2016, 17, 18. And from 2020 onward, we've made 3 AI investments.
But that goes pretty counter to what it seems like the consensus strategy is. Like you should be investing in AI because the companies are growing.
Yeah.
And you're getting markups, which always looks good. Like, why do you choose not to do that? Because it's so different from what most people are doing.
I don't think markups matter. Like they matter for sure because they help you raise funds, blah, blah, blah. I think we are fortunate enough that markups are not going to be what dictates success or failure for Compound at this point.
Because you have some, like you return capital.
Yeah.
Like you've made money for investors.
Correct.
They're not like, oh, cool, we got like a 5x markup on this AI seed. Like we don't care at this point.
Yeah. And I think like that's like a privileged position to be in as like a newer-ish fund, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then I also just think like, again, it's just like not what we do. Like we just don't, I think so much of investing is about figuring out what is it that you're really great at and like pushing that advantage over and over again, because something I deeply believe is like all venture firms decay over time. They don't compound over time as much as people think they do.
Interesting.
And
that's what most LPs would believe.
Most LPs would believe that because they look at persistence of returns. They look at the fact that Sequoia and Greylock and Index have had great returns for 20 years. And like, that's great. And also if you were to look at the universe of that versus like the universe of investors from 2020 onward, it's just like a totally different game. And I also think we're going through like the first generational turn ever in venture history, which is happening now. And that also means that these firms are probably decaying even faster than people appreciate. And so anyways, I just think like we need to stay focused on like, what is the things that we're great at? And the things that we believe we're great at is being a very generative firm that focuses on where non-obvious things could work. And we lose money 40% of the time is our model. And if we're right on 2 out of the 25 companies that we invest in, we'll have very good returns. If we're right on one of them, we'll have like pretty good returns. And if we're right on none, then we probably don't deserve to exist.
So you said something interesting there and made me think about maybe there's like survivorship bias.
Yeah.
So if you go back to, the late 90s, early 90s, the 80s, I don't actually know when you go back to, but like, we think about Kleiner, Sequoia, these like blue chip funds that they survived. They're around, they had good returns.
Yeah.
But there was a lot of other funds at the time. Maybe it's like a magnitude fewer than there were today, but there's still a lot. It's just like those are the ones that survived.
Yeah.
And then there's probably some that we like none of us know of that were also survived. Mm-hmm. That first kind of the .com bubble that survived through the aughts, the zeros, and then died in 2010. And they've been like forgotten again. And like you think of maybe a blue chip fund that's persisted throughout time, but it's really just a survivorship thing that they, not saying any specific funds, but I feel like that could actually be a piece of it is that there is survivorship bias in thinking about this persistence of returns.
Yeah. I think if you were to think of it as like percentage of ecosystem that dies maybe would like be the way to look at it, which is like,
I could see that.
If there's like 10 survive over 100 firms back then, 10% of firms survive. And like, if you do that today, it's like, there's hundreds of firms that survive and there's thousands of new firms. Like that would suggest the same thing. But I think the difference is probably like just the variance of returns is still quite high, even fund to fund. Again, some of these legendary firms, that is not the case, but I think it's meaningfully more competitive. And the structure of the industry is so much more well understood such that, you just have to be consistently trying to like refigure out what is your advantage, how has the world changed. I think for us, one of the things that we talked about at our annual meeting this past year was like Compound was predicated on this idea, which is like we understand very complex things natively. And that's like a great edge. But the truth to that is that now anyone can put an academic paper into ChatGPT and be like, explain this like I'm 16. And so actually the edge of like understanding complex things natively is like no longer really that defensible for us, right? Like it's not an edge. It's just another tool in our toolkit of maybe we can understand when something's a little novel, but like actually what that means is you have to be very good at understanding second and third order effects of these technologies and like how they cascade over time into value accrual into startups. And so I think like there's a world in which I could easily just be like, the thing we do at Compound is like, we understand hard things. And like, that's just totally bullshit today in a world in which anyone can put anything to ChatGPT and have it explained relatively easily.
That sounds like a great marketing kind of tagline though. Like, we understand hard things.
Yeah.
So then how would you build or how do you think about building like a research-driven institution? Because you do a lot of research.
Yeah.
If you look at the team composition at Compound, there's no like Stanford MBAs.
Yeah.
Like it's not like an Uber PM that's coming in and like so like how do you set this up and get this going? And then to your point about like the chat GPT stealing your secret sauce, like why are you still doing it if anyone can do it?
So like the argument we were not still doing it, right? We're trying to figure out the next order thing. So I think now you can look at the team, which is we have people who are obsessed with categories, have deep understanding of technical areas, and are incredibly generative and creative, right? And so what that means is like we have Shelby, who focuses largely on bio. She's a PhD from the University of Cambridge in bio, right? Like understands it very natively. And she can understand some of the dynamics of being a scientist, some of the complexities of building companies there. We have Smack, who's a pseudonymous investor.
I love that. Like, it's just Smack. I was trying to figure out what Smack's name was.
Smack.
Just Smack. Right.
And we met on Twitter, and he has prior background in traditional finance and structured finance, and now has been investing in crypto since like 2014. And so is like very native to the space. And then we have Mackenzie, who's a researcher on the team. And Mackenzie is just an obsessive person who sits at the intersection of understanding companies and understanding technologies and like loves trying to figure out how the entire world works. And I think like all of us have this obsessiveness around where's the world going? How does science and technology impact that? And most of what we do is try and push on that idea of like being generative such that when we talk to founders, we can have constructive, kind of novel feeling conversations. We're not just asking them the same 10 questions everyone asks them. And two, such that when there are times in which we are maybe feeling like the air has been sucked out of the room for 24 months, we can try to figure out, okay, but like what would be the things that would get us excited and why, and actually be more direct about those. We have a thesis database that does that. We do thesis development sessions once a month where we sit for 3 hours. Everyone brings together 2 to 3 ideas based off of a bunch of research and says, here are types of companies that should exist and how should we think about going deeper with those. We host research days in like very specific areas like biohacking and cryptography. And
is this public or private internally?
The research days are like open events of like 50 people, like kind of top researchers in a space.
Do you do open invites or do you just like kind of close doors, organize these things?
Yeah, we put it on Twitter and then we kind of just like pick and choose. And then there's usually like 6 to 8 presentations and then we'll present something at the beginning and connect everyone after. And I think like our whole thing is like, how do we, there's a bunch of weird ideas in the world that we think will matter long-term. And we should have a grasp on all of the possible ideas that could matter. And I think that's kind of how we orient our research process, which is reading a lot, wasting a lot of time reading things that probably will never be investable, and also meeting a lot of people who will never start a company. And the need to believe on Compound, I always say, is like we allocate our time meaningfully differently relative to other firms. And the hope is that like that time allocation plus how we think about the world and invest actually creates some form of alpha. There's other people who's like their time allocation creates alpha because they're incredibly good at networking, at scaled in a network, whatever. It's just like not what we do.
Yeah, Chris at Runway was saying, he said you have like dozens of random esoteric Substacks and blogs that you're like subscribed to. And
Hundreds, yeah.
Hundreds, okay. Not thousands though.
Probably across a team, thousands, yeah. We have a pretty big apparatus to track research and to like track people doing research and stuff like that. Like that's the main thing that like, and it's funny, now that we have all these AI tools, we've tried to basically like bring in more signal versus noise.
Yep.
And I think the main learning thus far, and maybe it like will get better, but the main learning is like, it still is, you still need to like just sit at the river and watch all the things go by. You can't like try and expect someone to show you the signal. Because I think like maybe the special sauce is like figuring out what is signal versus noise. And like, you have to be able to ingest the whole fire hose to figure that out. And so as a firm, like it's very much like we just read all of the things and hopefully we figure it out.
Yeah, I think Andy at USV said you seem to be good at looking at the stream and figuring out like what is signal and like what is noise and like deciding those things. Like specifically like some of the companies you invest in really like Runway, you could be like, AI, whatever, like AI is not going to be a thing. Like this is not a company it's not worth building a product and a company around this. Like, what do you think is the secret to actually figuring out what is worth even paying attention to in the first place?
I think it's spending a lot of time seeing all the things, right? And then you get to, it's like when people tell you, who's the VC? Trey Stevens, I think, is always like the first 6 months, you got to take 600 pitch meetings or whatever, right?
Yep.
And it's like you get the flavor of what's good and bad a little bit. I think like reading lots of research and then talking to researchers about it and your founders and other people helps. I think the other thing too is like people grossly underestimate like how long these things like sit out in the world. There's this woman who wrote a piece called I think it's called Discovering the Sleeping Beauties of Science. And the idea is that, and it's very similar to something that we talk about, which is like major scientific breakthroughs typically like sit out in the world for a long time if you can parse it, right?
Like Ozempic, right?
Ozempic was like the 1989 Stanford guy.
Yeah.
Gwern wrote about scaling laws in like 2016, I think. And it was like this random blog post. He's like, the thing that people don't notice about GPT-1 into GPT-2 is like, actually, if you put more data and compute in, like the performance meaningfully increases. And if you read these papers, like it doesn't really look like this is going to stop anytime. And like that was before anyone had the bitter lesson in scaling, whatever.
OpenAI was doing ICOs around that time.
Yeah.
Maybe that was 18 that they did that.
Yeah. It's just like, there's all this like stuff. Like GPT-3 sat there for a long time and the instruction tuned it and you got ChatGPT, right? Like, and I think like you could see that with AlexNet in 2014. You could kind of see that with like some of the stuff on how Solana was starting to scale in 2023 from like a transaction. Like there's data that sits, and if you're paying attention, the core thing that you start to notice is like, this is interesting and durable enough, and there's enough people talking about it. And like academia does a really good job of taking an idea and then like building on it. And so a simple thing I tell people who get interested in trying to do more thesis-oriented research is like, if you find a paper that you think is really interesting, what you should just do is set citation alerts for that paper. And what you will do is you will get an email anytime anyone cites that paper, and you will get to see in, some amount of time in your inbox every day or every 8 days or 7, like more and more people start citing it. And like, that's a pretty interesting signal where you're like, wow, like I used to get a email from Google Scholar every 3 weeks, and now I get one like every 4 days. I wonder why. And like, what that will tell you is a bunch of people who are ostensibly smarter than you are starting to care about a thing more and like are spending material amounts of time writing and talking about that thing. And so I think we have a bunch of kind of signals like that in the same way that a lot of great VCs, believe they have signals on like how to tell if a founder is amazing.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Is there anything that you've built internally? Like there's all these like AI, there's a lot of things you can do with AI to build tools internally. Most VCs, when they're talking about how great they are, they've got all these like data sources or they've got all these tools they built internally. Have you done anything like that on the research side to organize or surface it better?
We've done for searching across like topics for like, how do we run topic modeling on academic papers? We've done some stuff for monitoring like esoteric writing platforms for mentions of companies, more on the public side. But honestly, like it's all incremental. None of it's like a silver bullet. It's all like you still have to spend a disgusting amount of time reading a lot of words every week. And I just don't think any of the models are good enough to be like, hey, I read 1,000 posts this week on this thing, and here's the one thing you need to know. Because like you're going to miss the nuance, and you're going to miss the like, oh, that's an interesting idea. Like, I don't know, like there's this concept of model merging that emerged in AI maybe at this point 2.5, 3 years ago. And the idea is like you can effectively like slice and dice models, put them together, and you can start to see some emergent interesting behaviors. And like if you were funneling a bunch of AI papers, like you probably wouldn't have gotten the insight in 2023-4 when that happened of like, hey, like more and more people are like open sourcing these like Franken merges of models that they're talking about on Hugging Face. You kind of have to just be like watching everything and like watching what people are talking about on Twitter. And it's maybe like the 10th loudest or the 20th loudest thing, but it might spike on novelty. And so you're like, oh, this is weird and like experimental, and like 10 high signal people are talking about it, where the other side would have been like, I don't know, like test time compute is like the most interesting thing now, which is, running compute on inference instead of pre-training it for models. And it's like, everyone was talking about that. A bunch of very smart people were talking about it. So if you're an LLM, you're probably like, hey, this is the most important thing to pay attention to. And it's important if you care about like what's happening in AI today, but if you're trying to invest in where does the world go in the future, like the maximally understood important thing is actually probably like by the time it's there, you're going to not make money as a seed investor.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, the way that a lot of the way that we consume things now is algorithmic powered and driven feeds. And most of those are weighted and like sourced by time spent ultimately because the platforms want to keep you on. So if there's topics that people are spending a lot of time on, like that's literally what it is. It's like, do you click on a tweet and do you spend time reading it?
Yep.
And then if you do that, other people will see it. And that it's like a self-reinforcing thing where if I'm a content creator or a founder or an investor and a specific topic is getting more airtime, I need to be surfaced. I need to like be people think I'm relevant. I need to start talking about those things also.
Yeah.
And I need people to spend time on my stuff. So you get this weird dilemma where like there's more content to fill that void. And then the algorithms think, oh, more people are spending time on this topic. Yeah. So like they'll push them even more. And then like, again, like, so like, it's sort of like this weird structure of how the internet works now, where I feel like these algorithmic feeds have almost like amplified some of these hype cycles in a way.
Sure. Yeah. This is also important why everyone should have alts that are like based off of like different mindsets. Like we have I have different alts for the type of stuff that like I'm trying to go into. And like,
interesting. You have like a bio alt or something like that?
Yeah. Crypto alt, bio alt, maybe like a more speculative future alt. And then like my feed is like half venture garbage, some public stuff, and some like, I don't know, memes. Yeah.
Hopefully I'm in the memes, not the venture garbage.
It's the Venn diagram.
Yeah. Well, so you actually tweeted something, I think it was either today or yesterday. You're like 70% of...
It was a couple hours ago, yeah.
Yeah, a couple hours ago. You said like 70% of venture content is probably like created by LLMs.
Yeah. Or ghostwriters.
Or ghostwriters, yeah. I guess, why did you tweet that? Like, what's the rationale? Like, why is that a big deal for anyone listening who doesn't even know what that means?
I don't know if it's a big deal. My Twitter is relatively unfiltered. And so usually tweets like that are when I just get annoyed at like, I opened up an article or an essay and I thought it was going to be good. And then I see a fucking M dash and it's not X but Y framing and all these things. And that's annoying. And so I tweeted out. I also just think like, it's so cringe at this point. Like we all know what those writing styles are. And the fact that these people are not even trying to like edit it a little bit to not have it be like that shows just like a fundamental misunderstanding of how people think about content. And I think like we do a lot of writing, but our view has always been like, you need to treat content like kind of like a first-class citizen in the organization if you believe you're like a research-oriented firm, right? And obviously people do it for content marketing, but I just think it's like, it's another thing about venture that's annoying, which is just like a lack of thoughtfulness and like like venture slop is like a thing. And that can be investing. It can be how people are in board meetings. It can be how they are in pitch meetings, and it can be how they write. And again, I think like if people were writing about novel ideas, but using an LLM to help them figure it out, like that's fine, but it's not that. And the ghostwriting stuff is just, some people, like there are some VCs who have like Twitter threads about totally random stuff. And it's like long and 5 times a day and all this stuff. And I'm just like, what? Either you have the time to do that, in which case like you shouldn't do venture, or you're just like paying other people. And I don't get why. Like, I don't know. Yeah. I guess I think like, I'm just like, I was on a pitch call with like a fairly young founder a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago at this point. And he was like, I was reading your stuff and like, you're kind of like a boomer VC. I was like, no. Cool. Yeah. Like, I guess so. Like, I think I am just like.
So what does that mean? Why did he say you're a boomer VC?
I think because I was writing about like how companies need to think about like value capture properly and like competitive dynamics. And like, it's not just about like doing like fast ARR and like expecting it to stick around. I don't know. And so I think I was just like, I wasn't like vibes based. Yeah.
Yeah. You weren't vibes based.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like part of it is because it's become a check the box exercise. So you just hire a marketing person and they just write everyone, or they do everyone's stuff, or it's, somebody really just likes working with founders And like this marketing thing, like they have to make a LinkedIn post once a week or once a day or whatever. And like, they're like, ChatGPT, cool, copy paste.
Yeah.
Let's send it.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's maybe part of it is because people don't treat content like a first class citizen.
Yeah.
Like you said.
I think I'm just a bit of a snob and also like have too much of an ego around it to do it. I don't know. Yeah. That's the reality.
That's right. I'm still so bad at using ChatGPT to write. Like I literally do not use ChatGPT to write at all.
Stay away for as long as you can.
Yeah, I have started using it for ideas.
Yeah,
like
it's great.
To get ideas on things. And I usually think about it as just like it's a volume thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like just hit me with, like I had a friend, he was coming up with new names for a product.
Yeah.
And I just like was banging ChatGPT for like 10 minutes, just like keep giving me more ideas.
Yeah.
And he like started to like all the ones I was coming up with. It was literally just like ripping ChatGPT, like make it more futuristic, make it shorter, like make it rhyme or like hit the syllable, like, and again, it was just like it gave me hundreds of ideas, and some of them ended up being good, and I would not have come up with that if
I'm here for that. Yeah. Just don't put it into a 900 word blog post.
Yeah, exactly. And then how do you think then about building a brand as a venture fund? Like how have you thought about it as Compound? And then if I was like coming to you today, it's like, hey, I'm starting a fund. How should I do my brand marketing? Like if I'm doing content, what advice would you give me?
All people give advice in the way of talking about the things that worked for them. So I'm very aware of that. And so I'm always hesitant to give advice because I don't know. I think for us, the key thing that we're very precious about at Compound is like, is there a defined aesthetic across the entire firm in the sense of like, you can understand what is a Compound person, what is a Compound company to a lesser extent, what is Compound, what is the style of it? And I think over the past few years, we've started to have that develop more. And I think some of that is being very intentional. Like we have the types of things we want to put into the world, the style of people we hire. And I also think there is some like chaotic authenticity that people appreciate that we represent. So I think like for us, like we just continue to orient around like, it's very hard to build anything in venture today and in investing today that stands out, right? Like there's every person has a venture fund, every person is an investor. And so we at least want to be known for something. Otherwise we think we're like known for nothing, and that's the worst place to be. And so we orient towards like a lot of this more scientific, more thoughtful and prescriptive thinking in the world, hoping people will come and want to tell us we're wrong. But at least then the conversation we're having with founders is different. It's not the same 10 questions. It's like, you might think I'm an idiot because I wrote some post that directly contradicts how you think about building a company. And that's actually kind of a little bit how Alex at Wayve and I started talking early on. And I think like at a minimum, you can kind of like continually hit on that. I think the thing that we're maybe not as good about is like trying to figure out how to continue to expand the universe of people that know about us. I think as a new person, I think there's twofold. One is like, what is the credible reason why someone actually wants you on their cap table is like the question that we ask ourselves all the time. Our view is like VCs don't impact the upside of companies. We think that they like impact the downside. And so I think a lot of the lessons we've learned, which again, I know you can make all these expected value arguments, that means the upside, blah, blah, blah. But like the thing that we believe is like, there's a lot of lessons to be learned around building N of one, highly technical, scientific businesses or in areas that most people don't believe exist, and the way in which you can run commercialization long-term early on in some of these companies. And I think that's like part of our reason. The other is we're very high context. And so early on, people don't have to explain everything happening in the space with us. We can kind of be thought partners a little more.
Like, oh, we also read that paper.
Yeah. Like we've read this. We understand all these companies. We get like where technology is going. And thus, if you're building an AI product today built on models, we get like, we have a view of what capabilities will come out of these, whatever, bunch of stuff.
But don't other funds do that, right?
Sure.
Like they have an opinion on things?
Yeah. I think our argument would be like, our opinion is oriented very much around early stage and probably just being like net more thoughtful.
So it could be like with AI, if you wanted to actually invest in AI today, inception stage investing versus like, should you just invest in OpenAI or like, should you just invest in NVIDIA?
I was talking to a group of investors who are debating raising a fund of funds to do AI investing, and like they want to do half fund of funds, half direct. And there's 3 people and they're kind of split on which to do. And one of them's like, I kind of want to do this passively. Like, I feel like I can just play beta on this space and make money. And the other is like, I want to kind of be more in the weeds. And yeah, my view to them was like, listen, like it's going to take a long time to build up the alpha generating side of this. Like, go take out some OpenAI and Anthropic secondary, buy some Meta and Google, and like, I don't know, if you want, buy some NVIDIA, and like you'll probably be okay. And like, you'll perform on some way, right?
Yeah.
And like, here's the weighting I would think about, just sit. And like, we had a slide on our AGM this past year, which was like, you know, and we had all these ideas, and then the last slide was like, but even with all these ideas, like you should have just longed NVIDIA in 2020. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
You would have outperformed our fund. You would have outperformed every fund, like, like 23x or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just like, I don't know, like, yeah, I think like there are some moments in time in which you recognize like beta is the play. And typically I think when tech beta is like the thing, that's when compound retreats. And when it's not, that's when we kind of like try to push our advantages. And I think any new fund has to be oriented around that idea of like, this is risk capital. Yeah. Like, I think if you want to go and try to compete against Founders Fund and Thrive and like do growth stage, call it like levered beta alpha view investing, like good luck. They're incredible at what they do. And also, as we both know, like raising that sum of capital is non-trivial. But like, if you're a new person, you have to have an orientation of like, this is something I believe in, and I'm willing to like lose all the money doing it. And it's like not safe at all. And what we tell our investors is like, we should be the riskiest dollars in your allocation to investing. Because I think, especially as so much capital is flooded in order to generate meaningful outperformance, you actually have to do riskier and riskier things over time.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel like a lot of the solution to that has been, we'll just invest earlier. Like we'll just do inception stage now instead of
like we're past that. There's nowhere earlier to go. Like I'm not
college students, high school dropouts.
Yeah, like it's great. Like Prod is great, and like Z Fellows is good. Like they're very good at these things. But like if you want to build like an investment firm that can be durable, it's why I like these, like the Gen Z firm orientation thing is like it's like a short-term advantage, but it's not a long-term advantage because like these things ebb and flow. And to the point, like one day you show up into a Zoom and someone calls you a boomer, and like you're no longer the young person in the room.
Yeah, and like millennials, we used to be what Gen Z are. Yeah, and now we're like old. Like the kids on TikTok are wearing wide-legged pants. Oh yeah, like that's the things like they like come out though. I'm like, that looks ugly. Yeah, like, objectively, like give me my just like skinny or maybe straight jeans. Yeah, you're a boomer. Like, I don't know what to tell you, man. I can't do this wide leg thing. Yeah, but yeah, I guess we're just old. Yeah. So you mentioned a thing I wanted to ask you about. You said Wayve. Yeah, that's the name of it. Yeah. You said you actually disagreed about something. Yeah. So what happened there? Because that was one of you invested in their first round. Yeah. I think I saw they just raised, it was 800 million euros or something was what I saw on Crunchbase. Like, so I hope that's been a good investment for you. Yeah. So what's the story there?
Yeah. So I was fortunate enough to spend a bunch of time when I was living in SF for a brief amount of time with some of the early like Waymo team. There was 510 Systems, became Waymo. And I think as I spent time with them, the thing that I kept hearing was there's like a very famous demo in which they drove over the Golden Gate Bridge. And that was like mind blowing at the time. And they were like, oh, if we can do this, like we got this. It's game over. And this was in I think they did that in 2014, 15. And then what they kind of realized, actually they might have done it earlier, but what they kind of realized is like they kept hitting new ceilings of like, oh, we actually can't do this.
Because there was like really random edge cases. Yeah. They just had to keep solving edge cases.
Yeah. And they were just like, we just have to like keep hand engineering these rules and solving these edge cases, and computer vision's getting better, whatever. And these like throw out the code base every few years, start over, go. And I think the main takeaway that we had was like, self-driving was obviously a very valuable problem. It's very interesting, but everyone's building it in like a non-human way, which is like, you get on the road today, you go anywhere in the world, you basically can drive. Like you have 2 cameras in your eyes.
Your eyes, yeah.
And you have like a lot of compute in your brain, and like you kind of figure it out. And you know the rules of the road. Whether you're in China to New York to London, wherever, like you kind of know. You know the rules.
And they can be like, oh, by the way, in London, you drive on the left side instead of the right. Like, cool, I know that now.
And you don't even have to be told that. You can just look at the road and be like, oh, people are driving on the left side of the road. This is the way the world works. And so we had this like framing of like, okay, if someone is going to solve self-driving as a new company, they're probably going to do it in a much more like AI native way. This is 2016. And at that time, Cruise had been acquired. Waymo was starting to scale. Tesla was still early, but they had kind of autopilot. And we wrote a bunch of stuff around this, which is like, a lot of founders are going to spin out of these companies and raise short-term rounds with similar technical approaches and then get acquired for like, it was very similar to AI today. These companies were getting acquired for like 10 million an engineer back then, which was crazy and, hilarious now. And I think like, we also said, okay, there also might be companies that sit as like, middleware or as like different data layers on top of autonomy. So like pedestrian understanding was one.
A single company focused on pedestrian.
And we had read, or I'd read this paper from this guy, Alex Kendall, when he was at the University of Cambridge. And it was his PhD thesis. It was called SegNet. And basically it was like a new type of computer vision model. And I emailed him and was like, hey, this is pretty cool. Like if you ever think about starting a company, let me know. Because I was 24 at the time, or that's like how you thought about sourcing stuff, is you read something and you email someone, right? Like that's how you still do it, I guess. Yeah. And he responded, he's just like, I'm getting my PhD. Like, thanks, but like, I'm good. 2 years later, 2016, we hear from one of our venture partners who was at Uber on the self-driving side, like, hey, I met this guy, Alex Kendall. He's got this like really crazy approach for self-driving. You should talk to him. And I was like, the name sounds super familiar. Bumped the thread, and we ended up leading a seed round. And our thinking at the time was like, the Wayve approach was a single model end to end, and you can teach a car to drive itself because you don't need a bunch of handwritten rules because humans figure it out themselves, right? Like lots of data, you have emergent capabilities. And in retrospect, we all understand that now with LLMs, you just toss a bunch of data and they actually start to reason quite well. But in 2016, that wasn't really the case. And our view was like, look, maybe they're going to be wrong, right? Like maybe this is a total miss, but like if they're right, they are one of the only companies attempting to do this. And like this makes way more sense as to why this could win as a final mover relative to Cruise, Waymo, Tesla. And, Alex's main argument to me was like, all this stuff that you're talking about of like pedestrian understanding and like these like, little features, like that's never going to actually be a thing. It all is going to live in the model. Like it's a single model. Like these things will be emergent. And so, he was like, the first thing he said on the phone was like, I read all your stuff and I like don't really agree with it, but like we should talk. And I was like, cool, great. Yeah. And that's exactly the point. Anyway, so we led their seed round, been on the board of the company since then. We've gone on, raised a bunch of money. The company's doing well. I took a ride in a car in New York, which was the first New York ride we've had a couple of weeks ago. And it was like, I don't know, it was like, I don't have kids, but it was like one of the first times I've ever been like so proud about an investment. Cause I was like, I am crossing the Brooklyn Bridge in a self-driving car that like for 7 years I've been wanting to do this.
Yeah,
or
that's
8
cool.
years. Yeah. So I don't know. Like, I think again, there's a world in which the company just doesn't work, but like our framing is like, you have to take big risks on possibly great things. And like, if you do enough of those with really good reason as to why they can disrupt incumbents and capture all the value, which we think Wayve has and will, I don't know, you got to be right 1 out of every 25 times.
I have a question on that, but one thing I want to say in terms of having kids, the first time my daughter texted me back was like a crazy experience. Just as a millennial, like growing up, oh my God, she texts like she's on her iPad. She like texts me.
How old was she?
I think she was 7 at the time. She's 8 now. But I was like, wow, that's like, it just blew my mind.
It's like a real person now.
Like honestly, it was crazier than when she like walked and when she could talk. But it was like texting me back. I was like, holy shit, this is nuts.
Yeah.
But so it sounds like when you're thinking about like approach to starting a company and like sort of like the opportunity in a space, I know you've said before that not enough people think about kind of value capture. Like how do you actually like build, cash flow or enterprise value? Like what do you think people get wrong when it comes to thinking about how do you actually capture value for the business that you're creating? Or what do they get right?
Yeah, I think the main thing people get wrong is in deep tech areas is like the commoditization curve. Like they think that the edge will lie in technology, and like it almost never does, right? Like all technologies generally commoditize on some time horizon. And so
distribution or product uniqueness.
Yeah. Like, I mean, right now it's like velocity, right? Like right now it's like everyone is sprinting. And if you're not consistently sprinting for the past 3.5 to 4 years, you probably got disrupted by someone who like started, at a different point, but could leapfrog you in some sort of product vector. Again, like the way we frame it often is like there's short-term, midterm, and long-term moats. And I don't think it all correlates to like revenue necessarily, or like, like in the short term. Long term, these things kind of accumulate over time. But like, I think short term, your moats are like ability to raise capital. It might be technology, like you had a specific breakthrough, and you have to understand what's the half-life of that, technological edge that you've built. And then it's like, okay, talent, right? Like how do you compound talent over time such that you have a moat on talent in your space, especially in deep tech areas. Typically there's 50 to 250 people in the world that are elite at the thing. And then there's maybe a tier down of great operators that are, call it 200 to 1,000 people. And like that thus means there's, call it 1,500 people in the world that could work at your company when you start it, right? And so there's a bunch of stuff you have to think about there. And I think lastly is probably just like, how much of the given stack do you need to own such that you don't suffer death by 1,000 cuts? And this is actually more of like a newer problem, right? So there's the tealism, which was don't invest in like competition is for losers, right?
Yep.
And that was like a very prescient, albeit obvious take. I think now it's actually like you have to figure out like what vector are you competing on that's different from customers or from competitors such that you can like accrue value in your idea space. And the reality is that probably in the first 24 months of your company, almost no matter what today, because the amount of people, the amount of founders, the amount of dollars, you will have competitors then. You have to like very much think about like why your value accrual is like more durable than theirs such that you can like outlast them on a marathon. Especially because now, 6 or 8 years ago, by the time a company got to Series B or C, a lot of competitors would die out. Now it's like there's 4 to 6 companies that have raised $100 million going after the same thing. And like you actually have to just like continue to think about why you're part of the stack or why your product is positioned in a way such that like value flows majority to you relative to competitors or to like partners. So like the famous example of this is like in synthetic biology and maybe bio broadly. The first generation of these like next gen bio businesses like Zymergen and Ginkgo to a lesser extent, like really messed up value accrual. They thought about product really poorly. They like manufactured products that nobody wanted. And they worked in these JV models that like really didn't actually accrue much value. Like they didn't capture much value from. And I think what the next generation are now realizing is like, okay, you have to go after like super high value products such that you have a lot of margin to be able to leak some value if you need to, or you have to be able to get much further data in a data pipeline on like call it a bio company, such that when you go and partner with big pharma to do like a scale up or to do a JV or something, you actually have a much like deeper data package and you have more leverage in a given conversation. You don't leak like 95% of the value after spending, call it your seed to Series B, trying to get something to market. So it's very different space by space, and then crypto is like a whole nother world that we can talk about if you want.
So, but to the point of capital no longer being a moat, like, is it because there's just so much capital? Like, if something works, there's a fund that's big enough to say a $50 million bet on something that doesn't exist yet, like it's 0.5% of their fund, and they can do it like an angel check, and
there's enough capital around endowments, pension funds, Middle East money and sovereign wealth fund, whatever, that like are just looking to deploy such that like the universe of investors that can write those checks is pretty large. And I think what's happening today in AI is pretty interesting because people are trying to king-make companies, right? Like they're trying to like foie gras these startups into like just blowing as much on inference as possible to like nuke a market. And it just like doesn't work. Like I think
it's because there's so many other people doing
there's so many other people. And also like it just isn't, again, like the vector of differentiation is just like not wide enough. And we like the funny part is we kind of saw this lesson. Like you remember, this is 2017. We had Brandless, WAG. We had a bunch of these businesses that the original SoftBank Vision Fund blew money into, and it was like $200 million in this company with like 10 million in revenue. And like at the time, it was crazy.
That's like a pretty standard Series A now.
And they all failed. Like they all failed. because you just like, you can try to brute force distribution, but it hasn't worked, and I don't think it's going to keep working. And I do think that the thing that has happened in AI though is like, you have these like late movers of like really pedigreed people that then go and raise money, and like, they're not in it to like actually compete. They're in it to like feel like they're not leaving a bunch of money on the table. And I think that also is like these like talented researchers get king made as like these next generation labs that are going to steamroll the randos who build it for them. And it just has not been borne out at all.
So what would you do if you're a founder right now? Like, should I go out and I have a couple million in revenue.
Yeah.
I'm able to raise 200 million to like, what would you recommend if you're like on my board and I'm like, dude, what do I do here? Like, what strategies, like, or how should I think about it?
I think there's a few different ways to think about it. One would be, so like the obvious one, what do you actually need money for? Why do you do it? All that stuff, right? We'll call that this like simple down the middle of the fairway. I don't think we need to talk about that too in depth, but like do the reasonable thing.
So
like,
make a budget. How much money do you need to accomplish your plan based on your goals?
And figure out like, what are the experiments you would run if you had extra capital such that they could be like asymmetrically skewed bets that you can take as a company.
Yeah. Accelerate getting to that.
Yeah.
We built the competitive advantage and we're a public company and we have all the products and distribution, et cetera.
Or there's like, we need to corner the market such that other people can't make offers to our talent because we can pay them 2 to 3x top, which in today's market, unless you are literally Mark Zuckerberg, you can't outcompete on a comp. So good luck. I think the other one would be think about where you are in the cycle and think about like, the lesson that a lot of people maybe are starting to forget and also learned in 2021, which is like, when the circus is in town, sell peanuts. And so if you believe we are approaching some sort of local top of the market or frothiness, and you want to insulate yourself from dealing with that, and you understand that your research trajectory or your spend trajectory is long, go and like raise a bunch and have clear alignment on with the board, which is like, this is what our 2-year budget is. And like, we are going to raise 4x that because we believe either in 2 years, we will have a clear inflection where we know how to like deploy that money very aggressively. And we think being able to go heads down and do that is important. Or we think that there's a world in which the financing market falls off and the companies that survive will be those that took advantage of capital markets when they were ready. But like, I think a lot of people use capital as like a barometer for success. And the only thing I'll say is as you start to build a scaling business in AI, you do now today more than ever have to start to understand at least some of the dynamics around like, how do you get liquidity for employees as you scale and stuff like that, because that is becoming more table stakes at growth stage companies. And so you might need money for that.
Interesting. It just in terms of like
retention,
$100 million to just top people off or like buy their
hey, we're going to raise an extra 100 because, or 50 because we're going to run secondary sales that we can guarantee to founders 10 million a year for the next 5 years. And like, that is our retention mechanism against Meta, Google, insert other company that has effectively liquid stock. I think that's the thing that like OpenAI has done really well. They figure out how to create consistent secondary. Obviously, SpaceX has done that really well. And so even though they're private organizations, if you're an employee and you're doing the math trade-off versus the public companies, you actually are like, my stock's like 85% as liquid as theirs. And it probably has more ability to jump up in like big multiples each time, as we've seen with SpaceX and OpenAI, such that the math is a little easier to stomach.
So then as an investor, when you hear this phrase, like playing the game on the field, I'm sure you've heard that before. Yeah. Should you play the game on the field? Like, to what extent should you play that game?
As an investor, no. As a founder, I think you have to.
So as a founder, like you take the game, you play to the best as you can, to whatever your strengths are. As an investor, you just like don't play, like you just sit and watch.
We raised our most recent fund we closed it in April of 2021. We called capital in September of 2021, and we effectively didn't invest until February of 23. And it was because we looked at the market and we said, there's not stuff that we're super interested in, and everything is so expensive and raising such crazy rounds that we don't think we can make money doing this. I think the hard part, and what we've seen across different peers who maybe like also had some feeling about the market, is that doing that makes it harder to step back in, and you typically need to at least have the ability to like get back into the market in the right time and start to play a game.
Because people know you're not active, quote unquote, and you lose deal flow?
No, because you as an investor get validation for so long that you're right about the market structure that you're investing in. And it usually takes like, there's more burden of proof to reverse your mindset. And so you kind of are like, yeah, like maybe things are coming back. I don't know. And so like, I would say the mistake we made was probably we could have started investing, more consistently in that November 22 to March 23 period. And it took us a little longer to be like, okay, we think that the follow-on market will come back. Because a lot of our thinking was like, in the stuff that we do, no one's going to do a Series A in this thing in 24 months. And so if you're looking at, April 2022, you're kind of like, unless this is, meaning at the time it wasn't even clear, but unless it's like an AI company that like hits it, there's like no Series A capital still. And we spent all this time talking to follow-on investors, and you ask them like, hey, what do you want to see to get a deal done? And they're just like, I just deployed $600 million in 14 months. I have no fucking idea what I'm going to do. like they're just like totally lost. And so you're like, okay, well, if that person who like is ostensibly going to keep my company alive is trying to keep a bunch of other companies alive, like they're probably not going to step up.
Yeah. So you have to be thinking about the game that's being played on the field, even if you are not actually playing. So you have to observe still. You got to have the streaming subscription to like still watch the games, but you just don't play.
Yeah.
So it's like, what is the importance? Like when you're making an investment, do you think a lot about follow-on capital? Like what percentage? Is it like 50, 25% of
For
your
our
like
fund? Or what do you mean? Or like, what do you think about?
Yeah. So if you're like, okay, I'm going to invest in Runway.
Yeah.
I'm maybe going to do the next round, but probably not.
Yeah.
The C and the D, like how important, like what percentage you're like, okay, I need to make sure that like we can put 300 million into this company between now and the IPO.
Yeah.
Like, is that a big piece of it? Is it a small piece? You just like kind of, is like Jesus take the wheel? Like I hope that these guys crush it. And like,
I think we do a lot of understanding of what is the like trailing 6 to 9 month view on what milestones are needed to raise from a position of strength in every area we invest in. And so in bio, that's very different. In robotics, it's different. AI, different. Crypto, different, right? And so we have that. And that's like a big framing that we always tell founders, we want to align with you on the 18 months of your company and like the 7 to 10 years, and everything in the middle we don't know. But I want to know going in like, hey, month 14, when we decided to go and raise capital, like we're in agreement on like what we need to have done, right? And like that is pretty important. There are some areas that like this actually trickles even further. It's like bio right now, I would argue there's like a good amount of seed capital. There's a good amount of A capital. And there's like almost no Series B capital.
Is that scary?
Yeah, for sure. But our view is like bio is so skewed to the upside right now. It's so hated at the growth stages. Again, unless you're building an AI foundation model for bio, which like, cool.
What does that even mean?
Yeah, it's like so many of these. That like we are actually just betting that the market structure will change 4 years from now, which is when a seed company that we invest in today might go and raise a Series B. And like there's a world in which we're like wrong. And we will start to see like, hey, that we might recognize 20 months from now, hey, we're probably going to be wrong. I recognize 36 months from now. But like our job is to make sure that founders can be a little bit more like aware of what's happening for that next round, like further out. But yeah, sometimes it is Jesus take the wheel. And the interesting part about right now is like everyone wants to do AI and like most people don't want to do most other things like AI, American dynamism, everything else, some tech bio stuff. And I think as a seed investor, what that means is you just have to have confidence that like markets will mature and or like depth will move into breadth, which is like funny enough a trend that we see in like public markets too, right? And so I think that unlike Runway at the A back then, like nobody thought creative AI was interesting at the seed, and we were like, who knows if anyone's going to do it at the A. But back then, like venture was built around the idea of like everyone invests in everything kind of, right? Like you do fintech, like you do like software is software. And I just want to understand like who the buyer is, what the traction is, what the user looks like, show me some cohort data, whatever.
Yep.
It wasn't like I only invest in AI enabled software that does this, and that. Like it was less prescriptive.
Yeah. So I think another thing you actually did really interesting, Blake Robbins told me to ask about this with the longer deployment periods that you have in the fund. Like, did you do that on purpose, or was it kind of like because it was 21 and 22, you did a little bit of a different move there?
We always aim to do 4 years. Our first fund was 2016 to 2021, and it had a pandemic in the middle of it. And our second fund was 21 to, we'll raise a new fund next year. And that, the dumbest bull market in tech history in it. And so each will be a year longer. But our main view is like, we just don't get high conviction enough on a subset of ideas in a given year. And we're like pretty confident that you need a certain N number of companies. And we like the idea of being able to be very methodical and slow and not trying to raise capital or deploy capital such that we can raise more.
Makes sense. You had a pretty interesting comment. You called Compound a forecasting firm.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe self-explanatory this far into the conversation, but maybe expand on that a little bit. Like, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. I think one of the things that we do a lot of internally, and then we've published 2 externally, is like we try to take year by year views of what will happen in a given area. So we've published 2 of them. One of them was in 2022, we published something called a crypto future, which was I think 35, 40 page book that was looking at the next 5 years in quite great detail and saying like, here's what will happen across companies, regulatory, whatever. And we did that in biohacking last year, called the Biohacker Future. And we have this for a few different areas as well. And I think why we do that is it forces a level of rigor around like time horizon and around confidence intervals on your beliefs across a bunch of different things. And to kind of the initial point of like Compound was originally built around, we understand complex things, to now is like, we understand how to like model the second, third, plus order effects of how technologies move through the world. Like to do that, you actually do need to then like draw direct lines over multiple years. And so I think for us, we view that as like, again, a partially academic exercise, but actually one that very much informs like, you know, sometimes it results in actually this idea that we have that we think is a little crazy for 2025 isn't. We think actually the time to adoption or the time till this idea proliferating in the world is going to happen much faster. To the other side of like this cool idea that we think should exist, like we actually can't imagine a world in which a venture scale business is built over the next 7 to 10 years in this space, because we've kind of reasoned through how we think the world is going to change. And I think it also allows us to have founders like hopefully have some view of like where they fit within these futures that we model, and then either like fit within them and say, hey, like I'm building something that you talk about happening in 2028 and I think it can happen now. Or they can come in and just like totally shatter it and say like, this is never going to happen, but what is going to happen is what my company is doing. And that's equally strong signal to both. You know, we invested in a company called Tia many years ago, which was healthcare for millennial women. And our initial thinking was actually the right wedge was fertility, because it was like, you know, super high pay, very fragmented, bad experience. And those founders read a bunch of our reading on like why we think, you know, the fertility market was quite interesting for a clinical healthcare model and a digital healthcare model. And Carolyn and Felicity came to us and said like, you guys are wrong. Actually, the way you should think about this is women don't build a relationship with their doctors until they have kids. Most of the time, the average woman from the age of 20 to 28 in the US like cycles through their primary care physician 3, 4, 5 times. And that's because you don't see them as often. You don't have the same type of connection with them. But once you have kids, you actually change a lot less. And so if you actually catch women upstream of that and you build an experience in which they are in your healthcare system from 20, 21, 22, you actually can then own them for the entire life cycle. And, you know, women's health is a very different type of healthcare than men's health. They actually go to the doctor more often. They spend more, all these things. And so like that was their pitch. And we were like, yeah, makes sense. Probably right. Like,
we thought we had this great view, and but you probably got exactly like, yeah. But it's like it's a perfect setup though, because you kind of knew why you were wrong then. Yeah. Because like you got it.
Yeah, you're like, oh, I thought this thing, and here are all my priors, and I go, I know exactly what you like have voided, and I know exactly what you've kind of like confirmed, and I now have confidence that like this was right, this is wrong. And I think again, like that's just, it's so, I actually don't know how people do like reactive venture investing, because any company sounds fucking awesome when you sit down with them and they tell you about it.
Yeah.
That like, I would just say yes to all of them. Like, it's just like, of course, like this makes sense. Unless the founders, you don't believe in the founder, but like,
yeah,
I think outside of that, it's just so hard to have high conviction. And I don't know. Yeah, that's how we do it, but who knows?
And so like, it feels like so do you think you can have success being more of like a generalist investor,
Sure.
like not having a thesis?
I couldn't, but other people can for sure. Yeah.
And it's just because you have these other advantages of like you have the unique developed network, or you have like this great unfair advantage in understanding some technical things. So founders come to you and you get a fairly priced equity because of your expertise that you have or the value you provide.
Yeah, like that's a great sounding pitch. I don't know. I think like in general, it's just like this is the playbook that we know how to run with relative success. And like we think that like a subset of founders really want to work with someone who like has opinions on their space and know the space, whatever. And a subset are like, I would never want Mike Dempsey on my board. Like it's annoying to have some person who like reads a bunch of shit
He has
and
an
wants to
opinion
talk
on
about
everything.
it. Yeah. Like, and I totally get that. And like, I think that ebbs and flows. And I think like so much about being a board member, so much about being a lead investor, which we normally are at the seed stage, is like believing that you have a singular role to play in the company, not a totalitarian one. I think where a lot of VCs go wrong is they like step into a board meeting. They're like, I have answers for all of your questions. And I'm like, I don't know, there's probably like 50% of stuff that you're going to ask and I'm going to have no idea how to answer. But like, I have a bunch of types of companies that, in our portfolio, we see struggle with weird, complex things that often overlap with ambitious technical N of one businesses. And like, maybe you want to work with us for that. And that enough times allows us to win. And then all the prior work allows us to identify and theoretically pick.
Okay. So I want to talk to you about crypto. I want to ask one thing first though. So if let's say I'm 25, I just got a job at a venture fund and an associate. I'm really excited about it.
Yeah.
What advice would you give me to help me understand what I'm getting into and do a good job?
Or you're getting into just a massive pile of egos. I don't know. Like my advice is become known for something so that you're irreplaceable. Like I think that most firms hire junior people to expand the bandwidth of the partners. And what they should be doing is expanding the bandwidth of the firms. And so like when we've hired people, the thing that I've had to impress upon them is they kind of in the interviews will be like, I really want to understand what's hard in your world? Like what's hard in your life? Like what are things like you think I could take off of your plate? And I'm like, I don't need you to take anything off my plate. I need you to go add a bunch of stuff to Compound's plate. Like that's what you should be doing. I think good junior people figure out what is the thing that I will become indispensable for. And then what are like the things that I am like above replacement on for the partner I work with or for the team I'm on or whatever. Because you do kind of need like both, where people view you as like short-term valuable, which is like they do stuff I don't want to do, which again, I think is the wrong way to think about it, but a lot of firms do. And then long-term valuable, which is like, oh my God, if they left, I would never, like we wouldn't be able to do this thing.
Yeah.
And I think like building that framework across all types of founders is really helpful. The other thing I would say is do not just try to anchor on talking to young people and all this stuff. Like venture and investing generally is not graded on a curve. I do not care if you're young. Like your returns have to be just as good as Pat at Sequoia's or Napoleon at Founder Fund's returns to like be a good investor. I do not give a shit if you're 25. And so like that idea is something that people need to like really internalize. It's why I hate when people in their Twitter bio put their age. It's like, I don't care about your age. Like no customer is going to like be like, oh, this product sucks, but it's built by a 19-year-old. So like, I'm going to buy it versus like this one by a 30-year-old is like a little better, but they're 30.
Yeah.
Like the world's not graded on a curve. So like understand that very quickly and try to figure out why you can become above replacement to like the GP at your firm in a certain area.
Do you think you should think about it as like a long-term thing? Like if I'm getting my first job, like should I be entering this thinking I'm going to do it forever? Or should I be thinking about it as it's basically a sales job and a chief of staff type job? Like, should I just approach it from that perspective and embrace those skills?
It depends where you work. It depends what you want to do. I don't know. Like I think like we only hire people at Compound that hopefully want to be investors forever. And my view is like everyone will just continue to own more of the firm. And like, that's great. I think some firms are like, you're going to be here for 2 years. You're going to get experience talking to some of the smartest people in the world, then you'll figure it out. Venture is an incredible job because it creates massive amounts of optionality. It's a terrible job because you learn almost zero transferable skill sets. And so like, you have to figure out what it is, what your orientation is in it. I do think in general, all people, and like millennials and Gen Z in particular, have like this weird orientation now where everyone wants the next job to be the final one. Like everyone always says that. You like talk to them, they're like, I want the next job to be one where I can be at for like a decade. It's not realistic to try and make the next decision be the one that lasts forever. It's like, how do I check in every 6 months, make sure I'm still on some rate of learning, and do I feel like I'm building a defensible long-term skill set? And I don't know, with the AI stuff, everyone's having existential crises. Like every week I talk to like a 24 to 32-year-old who like has no idea what to do with their lives and think AI is going to steamroll their career. So
do you think that's true? Like if I'm 34, maybe I slightly fit in that bucket. Is AI going to steamroll my career? Like, should I be worried about AGI, or is it just a tool that I learn to use to take advantage of? Like,
it'll probably steamroll parts of it. I don't know. Like it's like to the point that I've said, like it steamrolled our edge in understanding papers. Like, I don't know. And so what do? You like evolve to use the tool to do next order things better.
Yeah.
I think the like meme of the world will be split into people who can't use models, people who can, is like quite true. But I don't think I have like a perfect answer. I will say I'm more in the Tyler Cowen bucket of like diffusion of technology actually takes longer than people tend to appreciate than the like, I don't know, some of the like Anthropic people who are like AGI next year, we're all fucked.
Yeah. Well, it's like with ChatGPT, like I'm still meeting people like, I just learned about ChatGPT last week. I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's what do you think of it? That's fun. It's really fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
So actually I lied. So I have two more things. So one of them, so you do like the early stage and the public market thing. Like it's complete opposite really at the end of the day, but maybe there's some parallels.
Yeah.
What do you think that the two could learn from each other? Like if I'm a public market investor, what could I learn from learning to think more like an early stage, seed stage investor? And then early stage, seed stage investor, what could I learn from somebody who does public market investing and has that skill set and that appreciation of the world?
Public market investors are starting to learn that idea moats and like the framing of like narrative capture is actually like way more valuable than they ever appreciated. And I think private market investors have understood that quite well. Like being the Uber for X is not nearly as valuable as being Uber. And like understanding these companies that like create categories, dominate the narrative for their space, and like act as what we've called them like Schelling point companies of like, we think that is like materially valuable. That creates a multiple on your business. And I think that's something that public market investors have started to get. The Tiger Cubs started to get that earlier, right? They were all about compounders and like this idea that these things will just compound over long periods of time. And if you look at what they held, it was like mostly tech stuff and like Mag 7 related stuff. I think early stage investors or venture investors, like the flip side of that is like there are sometimes shooting stars, and there are also like there's gravity in markets. And what that means is that like you have a maximally optimistic vision of a company. And I think we saw this in 2021, which is like everyone took the maximally optimistic view of like, WeWork isn't an office company. It's like a new type
data,
of
real world data.
Yeah. And it's like, well, actually, if you like understand kind of like how these companies generate revenue, what margin profiles look like, they typically will only ever maximally be worth X, right?
Yeah.
I think like that is actually quite important to understand. And the tension is that like Mark Andreessen saying software is eating the world was like incredibly prescient and actually defied a lot of the gravity of what people thought technology companies could be worth over long periods of time.
Yeah.
But like that is now a consensus view, which is the consensus view is things will be bigger than anyone can appreciate. And I actually think it is more non-consensus to say that certain things have gravity. And there's some stuff that will defy gravity. OpenAI and Anthropic are businesses that defy gravity. Cursor is a business that defies gravity in the scale of which it's growing. I think that like there are the vast majority of others that do not defy gravity and like they will reach some sort of terminal value, and thus private market investors should understand how to finance those businesses, how to exit those businesses, and help founders understand how to navigate like properly landing the plane on these companies as public companies that continue to operate and generate cash flow or whatever, as acquisitions, as not overfunding them, whatever it is. Yeah.
So it's like public markets, it's realizing that the upside is so much higher than you think. And in the private markets, it's realizing that the public markets need to value these things at some point.
Yeah.
So just remember how that works.
Sometimes. And I'd say on the public market side, it's also like that there are things that are worth more, not because of like quantitatively legible things.
Like it's not showing up in the financial statement specifically.
Yeah.
But like this thing is trading at 500 times free cash flow, but it's because it literally has 90% incremental operating margins because of specific market structures or scale economies or like whatever the thing is.
It can be that. It can be fundamentally driven, but it also might be it's the only way to express this view in the public markets. And thus the flows are inherently dictated to go there.
The multiple will just expand from 20 to 40 just because.
How else can you get pure play exposure to AI and government and you long Palantir? How do you get pure play exposure to rockets when you see Elon as SpaceX? Well, actually, I can buy Rocket Lab. Like, how do I get pure play exposure into robotics? Well, there's like this random ass company called Serve Robotics that was publicly traded via SPAC and on $4 million in revenue was worth $1.4 billion in public markets for a while. Like, there's a bunch of these. And I think sometimes flows just disrupt any sort of fundamentals. And I think if you were to, one of our core beliefs is like crypto today is 80% narrative, 20% fundamentals and how these things are valued. And public equities, you could say are, let's say 80% fundamental, 20% narrative. It's probably not that, but let's say, and those things are going to converge in the opposite directions.
Interesting. Well, it's an interesting like transition into crypto. So just generally, like if I've never heard of crypto before, like I say, I'm a smart person, I have the ability to understand it.
Yeah.
Just like, why does it matter? Like, why is it a thing?
I hate defending crypto at this point. So I will do it very lightly. I think there's a variety of things that have happened with each year that goes by. I believe more and more in the core principles that underpin crypto. And those core principles are first order, like self-sovereignty and being able to like own and move and have transparency to the things that you own and move. And related to that is like a distrust of institutions and distrust in any sort of large actor in the world. And then I think third is like just massive inefficiencies that compound over time in structured systems, and smart contracts inherently are good at that. Like code is good at that, and immutable code is very good at that because then they can't be changed, and that works its way back into the distrust, right? And so on the first order side, Bitcoin is like the greatest example in the world on this, right? It's you can move Bitcoin across borders, you can move billions of dollars and no one would ever know, except for theoretically on the ledger if you sent it, but you could just keep your hardware wallet with you and move. You can't do that with gold, you can't do that with cash. You also can't have assets that can be seized easily because again, there's no treaty that can happen between the US and insert other company and they can take hold of your Bitcoin.
Your bank account or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it's literally like you have a hard drive that has the hashed code that says that you have X amount of dollars or X amount of value in Bitcoin that you can plug in anywhere. You can go to Japan, you can go to Brazil, plug it into a computer, and you have access to it.
And this is like the argument of people who are like, well, stable coins don't matter because like I can Venmo someone and it works tomorrow. And it's like, you can. And also like the US government can tomorrow be like, hey, Venmo, you no longer can like serve any person who lives in any country, right? Like insert country name, or you can't serve anyone who has tweeted against the president or whatever, right? And being able to like move a stable asset is also very valuable. And so like decentralized stable coins are very interesting. Tether is a good example of that in some ways. DAI is another example. And then like lastly, these like smart contract components, which is like, you know, if I today want to get a mortgage, under collateralized is still quite hard, right? Like that is something that is built on hundreds of years of trust. We actually haven't figured that out on chain yet. But if I want to do an over collateralized loan of any kind, and I know it's not as efficient, whatever, I can go on and do that by pledging an asset into code, pulling out dollars against that asset in 2 transactions and about call it 6 seconds for $3 of gas fees if I do it on Ethereum, maybe a little more. Like that is pretty like elegant as a solution. And there's like a lot of building blocks that can start to be built on top of that. My favorite example, which is actually a largely failed protocol, but there's a protocol called Alchemix. And basically what it is let's say you have $100,000 of ETH, you can put your ETH in and you can take out $50,000 of USDC that you can though go buy a car with. And what the protocol will do is it'll take your ETH and start to lend it and earn yield and auto pay back your loan. You don't have to do anything. So you now have pledged an asset, you've gotten money out, your loan is being auto paid by generating yield elsewhere. And at some point you can come back and you can be like, okay, I'm just going to take my ETH out now. It's been all paid back. And it's like fully locked in smart contracts, in code. And that is like a mechanism that does not exist in traditional finance. There's no like take a loan, put money market, have it route this way to like pay back my loan. There's like many layers in between. There's people clipping 25, 50 basis points of fees all along the way that make that process even more expensive.
You're saying different like asset management firms or different
verifiers,
collateralized,
all sorts of stuff, right? And so I think like on the DeFi part, that's quite interesting. And then there's a bunch of other stuff too, which is like capital formation matters actually across a bunch of areas. Like we think decentralized science is really interesting. And today, if you wanted to do research on a rare disease indication, like the pharmaceutical companies have largely punted on that, it makes no sense. And as a VC, it actually also probably doesn't make sense to back some of these rare diseases. But there's a cohort of 5,000 people that it really matters. And they're going to happily put money in to own a piece of the IP and watch this drug come to the real world. And like doing that on chain is like incredibly efficient and also allows people to coordinate capital in a trustless way to then go and trust someone will do something, which is the science, but you can observe that science being done. And again, we think that's like very interesting. I think the problem with crypto is that it has largely been held back because I would argue the best builders in the world on average have chosen not to build in crypto because up until this year, it was uncertain whether at some point in your life you would be dragged in front of insert legal body because someone one day decided like everyone who ever worked in crypto should go to prison. And I think now that, in my opinion, is largely off the table and I think will be more clearly off the table in the next few years, like you will see a lot of more talented, less grifty people enter the space.
Yeah, because when I think of crypto, I just think my general mental model is like 99% of it is just like frauds and scams. And there's maybe like some interesting stuff, but like too hard because just generally the incentives around it just lead to a lot of fraud. So it's just kind of like avoid.
Yeah.
So like an example with like with stable coins, it's like, the government says you can't send money to this place, but you can with stable coins. I mean, there's a reason that the government is not allowing you to send money, right? Like, is it like are you only using it to commit fraud or is there like real reasons?
What if the reason is just like we are having a bank run and as a government, we don't want our citizens to be able to move money out of the country?
So it's a way to make sure that you're not trapped in that like
we assume that all governments operate in the interest of their citizens, which is like not true. and
I mean,
in America, it's not even clear if it's true.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Like in other countries, it's definitely not true.
Yeah.
And I think that like that component is like quite important to internalize, which is like, I don't like, this is the most ridiculous framing I've ever had. In the same way that like, you don't trust the random startup to like auth into your email and read all your email.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like, there's a bunch of people who are like, the real world problem, not our, first world problem is like, I don't trust the government to auth into my entire life earnings and like be able to see it and take advantage of it and seize it at any moment.
Yeah.
And like, why don't I do that? Well, because like that startup's been hacked 10 times and their emails have been leaked. And like, they're like, well, because this government has like printed money 5 different times and inflation's been 80% for the past 7 years. Yeah. And so like, why do I want to hold it in this native currency? And it's like, well, I know why they want me to hold it in the native currency.
Exactly. They benefit from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, I don't. And so like, I think there's a lot of things like that. And I think you can go, this is a little bit crazier, but like one of our beliefs is like, I think you can go further and look forward in the future and say like, what we have seen over the past few years is that monetary policy is actually like fairly pointless unless you are one of the most powerful countries in the world, right? So like if you control the yuan, if you control the US dollar, and then like the euro and the pound and some of these other more felt, but controlling monetary policy is like incredibly complex and difficult. And a lot of countries are starting to just be like effectively like soft pegs to the dollar because it's all that matters, or to the yuan. Some have totally ceded and they're just like, we're actually just going to trade dollars now. And I think more and more countries are going to start to be like, listen, the only thing that really matters is like, can you send a bunch of military into my country or not to control our citizens? And like, can our military control our citizens, not like printing dollars? And if that's the case, like, why don't I just instead like use Bitcoin or use another asset or just use a US dollar or something else? And like, I don't have to worry about this anymore.
Worry about trying to figure out my own
Monetary
rates and policies. Yeah, that makes sense.
And you kind of saw a version of that when like the euro, like European Union happened, right? It's like the euro actually was like great for, well, it was good for Germany in some ways, but it was great for other countries as well.
And so why hasn't crypto just like broadly taken over everything? Because like the things you just described, a lot of them is you talk through them like, oh yeah, it does make sense. Yeah, it does make sense.
Yeah.
I get that. Why isn't every single financial service currently offered like on chain in some capacity?
I think up until like 3 years ago, it was like pretty hard. Like the infrastructure is pretty hard. I think a large number of people like don't want the accountability, to be fair. Like they don't want to have their codes and like their keywords and their hardware wallets, whatever. We've started to solve some of that with like Privy and stuff like that. I think the regulatory environment up until 12 months ago was terrible. Like you could legitimately go to prison if you did something in crypto. And you also couldn't attribute value to tokens. Like it was illegal to be like, this token is actually worth this $400 million that's sitting in this treasury. Like it's a claim on those assets. And like that makes it really hard to make these things feel totally valuable. It's kind of like some people believed it, some people didn't. And so like, I think now that a lot of those things are starting to ease and a lot of the infrastructure is starting to change, it will, but it's been definitely slower takeoff than we would want. But again, like, I don't know, we're effectively we're like 13 years in, 14 years in. I know like Bitcoin was earlier than that, but like, I don't know, 2008, 2012, I don't really take into account as much growth in crypto.
So you said something about how up until 12 months ago, like you could just kind of randomly go to prison. Like you didn't know what the context, what exactly happened? Because I feel like I've seen a little bit of it. Like I don't know the exact nuance. It sounds like you're pretty...
There's been more... So there's a bunch of stuff that we believe will happen over the next 12 months, but there's been more clarity around what is a security and what isn't, what is a current, like what's a currency versus not, who controls like the legislative body that would theoretically regulate crypto.
Mm-hmm.
There has been more of a signal from the government of we want to embrace this and we are working towards this. And that's what Trump and Sachs and a bunch of these people are kind of theoretically working on. There's also been a disgusting amount of grift along the way with meme coins and other stuff. And now there are starting to be like stablecoin bills that enable banking institutions to like bank people with crypto, to traffic in stablecoins, things like that. And so I think there's like a lot of, I would say there's not a bulletproof, and there's also now new legal frameworks as well that are enabling people to create entities that can be governed by decentralized groups effectively. And that took some time to be like properly recognized at a state level. And so I would say like it is still unclear whether if you want to direct cash flows to a token, which would make it pretty security-like, whether that would be totally embraced today, but legally, but the signals are we are working towards embracing a version of that and giving clarity on what are the reporting mechanisms and the transparency needed in the same way that public tech companies have to, or public companies broadly have to, abide by a certain amount of rules in the SEC and from a filing perspective. And up until then, there was zero guidance and there was zero willingness to talk about what the guidance would be.
So you didn't even know what you're supposed to do in order to do things correctly.
No, yeah.
So it was just like you wouldn't do them because there's a chance that you'd be in prison for life.
Yeah, I mean, like
there's
very famous of like multiple people at Coinbase, Paradigm on the legal side, a bunch of the DAOs, like the Uniswap team, whatever, trying to talk to the SEC, and they basically just refuse to tell them anything. And they're just like, sorry, we're not going to talk.
So like we don't have an opinion, or we're specifically not sharing things with you?
Just like you want answers to figure out how can you legally do this properly, and we are not going to give them to you because we hate crypto.
So it's just like, maybe it's like an irrational, or is irrational from them for certain reasons to be against any sort of crypto adoption.
I think it was operating in bad faith is what I would argue. I think that there is like if you have people who've been operating businesses to the best of their ability legally for long periods of time and are actively documenting and trying to figure out what do we need to do for you to make you give us some guidance on if what we're doing is proper, legal or not. And you're saying, not going to tell you. And at the same time, you're like throwing lawsuits at a bunch of these companies. It becomes like you're operating in bad faith. And like Hester Pierce, who was one of the SEC commissioners, said that about Gensler last year. And like there was a very clear dissent and disagreement amongst the SEC of like, this is clearly not operating in good faith. I think now that has changed and it's actually more of a bipartisan issue. And so we're quite bullish on how that can progress over the next few years.
So it's basically like, tell us what we need to do in order to abide by the law.
Yeah.
And we'll do that.
Yeah.
And that's, you think that will actually cause probably fewer, do you think there'll be less grift in crypto going forward?
There'll be less grift, and also there'll be less people victims of grift because it will be very clear like, hey, we are at least making a good faith effort to try to do things that are trackable, auditable, fundamentally legal, whatever, sits within some legal purview. And people who are like, I'm not going to do that are like going to inherently probably suffer from a lesser amount of like capital flows and interest.
It could be objectively clear, like these guys are doing something illegal.
Yeah. I mean, illegal, or just like, there's some people in crypto who just refuse to believe that they should be under any law. And like, that's cool, but like, that's just not the way the world works. I'm sorry. Like, it's like, you have to be a part of something. And so I think we'll start to see more of a separation of those things.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the way I've always thought about crypto as my framing is just like, it is its own separate economy in its own world. Like let's say you have $50 million of Bitcoin. Yeah. Like you bought it a long time ago. And it's like you now are like a part of this whole entire economy. Yeah. Like this whole entire society or world. We're like, we almost don't care what's happening in the US or Azerbaijan or like Kenya or whatever, wherever you live. It's just like, I'm worth $50 million in crypto. Like that is my reality now. So it's almost like become its own separate economy, society, country, like the whole nation. What's it called? Nation state? The Balaji thing. How does he describe it? Like it's become its own like sovereign state outside of geographic boundaries. Like it's like an internet economy almost. And like is Ethereum its own internet economy? Like is Sol its own like thing, right? Like I don't know if that's the right frame. That's kind of in how my like non-expert.
I think of it as like there is a view that I do believe is like there are in the future there could be three factions, and like you know what it's looking like today is there's like the U.S. faction and our allies. There's a China faction and China's allies, and I think there could be a third that is like a more decentralized faction. And they all have to, we have to order stuff from China, and like we export to them, and like people from the crypto side transact in the real, all these things work together. But I do think there could be more split between those. I will say though, the interesting thing is like, because of the massive wealth creation effectively on like belief in crypto early on, like there wasn't this is like a crazy thing to say, but like there wasn't a lot of hard work to be done when you like, like the hard work was not selling your Bitcoin effectively. It wasn't like you had to like build a company and like do all these hard things. There is a massive amount of like philanthropy, and also more and more each day I talk to crypto people who like want to do things that have like impact on the real world. And so there is a desire to like figure out how to translate or like cross over in these worlds more and more, because I do think once you get past the like wealth game and like the like I need to make a living game, people want these, like they want the worlds to coexist. And so we talk to a lot of people who want to do like longevity, bio-investing, stuff that feels super, super tangible and important. And they're using crypto wealth to finance it, which is like an interesting signal to me.
Yeah. I actually have one more completely unrelated question to any of this. So SMAC told me to ask you about How are you thinking about AI and robotics?
I think robotics started as the history of robotics for us, which is 2016 onward, was like that moment in time. A lot of people thought that AI was going to make its way into robotics. And we backed some companies under that premise of using reinforcement learning and a bunch of stuff to have really intelligent robots. It was a little early. And what people then moved to was, okay, we have like mechanical engineering, and like that's like you build machines effectively, right? And they're not super intelligent, but they're very repeatable, they're robust, they can do certain tasks. Now I think everyone kind of looks at the past few years of ChatGPT and says, okay, the main lesson we've learned is the bitter lesson: scale data, scale compute, you get emergent intelligence. Apply that to physical objects. And so everyone just is kind of drawing the line and like putting a piece of paper and tracing it with robotics. And they're like, all right, so it's 2020 in AI time, but it's 2025 in robotics. And so next 5 years, we're going to see an explosion of intelligence. And then they kind of do the thing that is equally as not creative, which is they're like, and what kind of robot should it be? And it's like, oh, it should be a human. And it's like, okay, well, why should it be a human? Like it should be a human because like that's maximally generalist. It's maximally easy to understand.
Think of the TAM on that thing when you're raising money.
This is the point.
It's like the economy.
It's a great narrative arc. I think the thing that we believe a little differently is like, this point on creativity is there's a bunch of different mechanisms in which you can build robots that can do things superhuman, right? Like we shouldn't be aiming for like replacing humans. We should be aiming for building superhuman things. And so like a laundry machine is a superhuman clothes washer. Like it's incredible at doing that. Same with the dishwasher, all these things, right? And so a lot of where we think about investing is intelligence will scale. Things will become more multifaceted in their ability to move throughout the world, understand novel environments, but actually more purpose-built robots will be able to win, both because they're easier to manufacture. You don't need like nearly the amount of actuators and motors and things like that to like do this with your hands. And also they'll be able to get distribution ahead of a bunch of these humanoids. Like humanoids just won't be able to scale at the rate that other types of robots will, again, because of the technical complexity in building them. And so like all deep technologies, a lot of people build hammers and then look for nails. And I think like in robotics, a lot of people have like the hammer of like AI scaling laws and like humanoid robot, and they're like looking for a bunch of nails. And my view is it's valuable to replace a human. Don't get me wrong. Like, some human physical labor can be anywhere from, on a contracted basis, $30K to $200K a year. And the very valuable ones like Intuitive Surgical built a surgical robot, which is not autonomous, but for the sake of this argument, does a very high value task of surgery. But like the more valuable thing is actually like not like the human life. And like that thus leads me to believe that if you were to build a humanoid, you care a little bit less about what is the dollar task of the employee you're replacing and more about like, what are the situations in which it's like really bad to have humans in that scenario because their life is at risk. And so that leads me to be like, okay, if you assume there's an amount of manufacturing of these humanoid robots that reaches some ceiling, which like, I don't know, auto OEMs can only manufacture a certain number of cars each year because the manufacturing apparatus is limited. You would then say humanoids should be in military and industrial settings only.
It's like firemen or something. Go into a home, carry people out.
Yeah, like
something like that.
As a city, as a taxpayer, I'm not upset about how much firemen get paid. I'm upset about if a fireman dies, right?
Yeah.
And so like the amount of value I'm willing to spend is like materially more than the wage.
Yeah.
And so this idea of like, we're going to have humanoid robots in our home that do what like, mid-wage labor does is like a little ridiculous to me if you try and reason through it in the near term. In the long term, sure, like cost curves will come down, manufacturing scales. But I think by that time, you will just have purpose-built robots that already have distribution today, such that I won't need, in the same way that I don't have a server farm in my house because I actually we figured out how to get PCs into the house before we put server farms into the house. Like there will be other products that emerge that are adjacent for doing the same thing, which is like computation, that will get distribution and win out.
So is it just the narrative of the humanoid robots, like it just takes over?
Yeah.
And
it's great. Not unlimited TAM. You don't have to pick the utility today. You can say like what's going to be general purpose. And so like will be super malleable. And actually, if you look at AI, like the best models are general purpose right now. And so like, I don't know, would you rather be an investor in OpenAI or would you rather be an investor in 11 Labs? And it's like, they're both awesome companies, but like, I'd rather be in OpenAI. And like OpenAI is the humanoid robot and 11 Labs is like the defined robot, right? And so I think like that is a ridiculous argument when you have to bring things into the physical world. Again, like markets have gravity in some ways, companies have gravity, but VCs and other investors like get very lost in that. And some of the humanoid companies are incredibly good at marketing, and like they make these sizzle hype videos, and a lot of investors like love science fiction. They get like nerd sniped into being like, I know exactly how that world works because like I saw Terminator and I
read Ender's
Robot
Game
and Frank and
like the Foundation.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, cool. Like I can envision that versus like it's kind of hard for me to imagine what a purpose-built retail robot is.
Yeah, actually, Asmac told me to ask you about this too. When it comes to like the hyped launch, what's your opinion on? We're definitely in a phase where like that is the strategy.
Yeah,
is like get a $100,000 launch video, or maybe it's less than that with AI now, but like perfectly polished launch video.
Yeah,
you put out this narrative.
Yeah,
and then you raise money and try to build a company.
Yeah,
like what's your opinion on like is that a good strategy? Is it?
It's probably from an expected value basis, a good strategy. Yeah, like people will see the video, they'll be able to understand it, they'll share it, and it'll drive inbound. And if the first fundraise is all about maximizing funnel size, like it does that well. I think it's like at this point so unbelievably not creative, and like often the videos themselves aren't even that creative. It's
there's
like,
a playbook.
Yeah, it's a playbook for sure. It's like the wood panels. It's the same thing. It's like
every podcast
has the wood panels. It's the same. It's like stand at desk, talk about product, zoom into like screen to show product, whatever.
Probably an American flag somewhere in the background.
Maybe
depending on who you're posturing to.
Yeah. And so like I just think like, I don't know, like it's weird that we're like the best founders are spiky and like they, they're contrarian and they are out of distribution feeling, whatever. And then it's like the people like you give the most money to, if you're an investor, like people I give the most money to are the ones who do the same exact thing, look exactly like all the others, act exactly like all the others.
Yeah.
But again, I think it's like, it's reasonable. And I think that there's a lot of investors who make their way into these firms where the job is like, do the reasonable things. And if you do the reasonable things, you'll get promoted. And if you don't do the reasonable things, and if you do the reasonable things, you lose money, you won't get fired. If you do the non-reasonable things and you lose money, you're going to get fired. Yeah. And like, there's some next order middle ground, which is like, if you do the unreasonable things and make money, you'll get promoted. But if you do the reasonable things and make money, you actually might not get promoted. And so it's like, there's like a lot of like very weird, like multifaceted thinking. And so usually people are like, do a bunch of reasonable things and then jump firms such that it doesn't matter how they turn out. And that's like on the other side of the table, that's like the expected value dominant approach to venture.
Yeah, that's fair. Because there's sort of like performance-based investing and like AUM-based investing. Yeah. There's like these two different, I feel like they're different strategies at the end of the day. Like are you compensated from making money for investors, or are you compensated from raising money from your investors?
Right. Yeah. I mean, being like Cathie Wood is like the best fundraiser of all time, and has also lost more money than anyone in human history. So
yeah, which is maybe a story for the next podcast conversation. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for doing that.
Of course. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. And thanks to Ramp for supporting this episode. Upgrade your corporate card and get $250 at ramp.com/thepeel. If you missed it, check out last week's episode with Ryan Hoover, founder of Product Hunt and Weekend Fund. And tune in next week for a conversation on endowments and institutional asset management with Dan Fader, Senior Managing Director at University of Michigan's Endowment. If you like this conversation, please like, comment, subscribe, and name your next humanoid robotics model after me. If you don't want to miss a future episode, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, linked in the description to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.